Hi, welcome back to the basement. I'm Steve Lewis. Today we continue our discussion of the Beach Boys' 1968 album, Friends. And as I did last time, this time I put a few more of the new and notable releases from this period in these three cubicles. These are albums that you might have seen prominently displayed had you walked in to buy a copy of Friends on the day of its release, June 24th, 1968. And in our last episode, we concluded by talking about Dennis and Steve Kalinich's co-composition, Little Bird. Next up on the album is another Dennis Kalinich co-composition, Be Still. And it strikes me as kind of odd that they put these two tracks back to back on the album. I know if this had been a Beatles album and these had been George Harrison tracks, there would have been one on one side of the album and another on the other side of the album. It's not a complaint, just an observation. Side two of an album is often where the weaker tracks go. These are not weak tracks, in fact they're quite good, but I wonder if possibly because they weren't Brian tracks, it was thought that they would have less appeal, and that's why they ended up back to back on side two. Maybe it was a thought to give Dennis a little spotlight area on the album, I'm not sure, but it is interesting that they ended up back to back. The lyrics seem to be about meditation, and while Mike is the Beach Boy that we most associate with TM now, and he was probably also, after his trip to Rishikesh earlier in the year, the one most associated with TM at the time the album came out, all of the Beach Boys except Bruce explored and espoused TM to varying degrees. Of course, as we mentioned in an earlier episode, the group first met the Maharishi at a benefit performance for UNICEF in Paris on December 15, 1967. It was an event attended by much of the international jet set and featured a wild variety of performers, including, in addition to the Beach Boys, Johnny Halliday, Lena Horne, Ravi Shankar, Victor Borge, Marlon Brando, Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, and the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. The Maharishi had been famous since late August as the Beatles' guru. John Lennon and George Harrison were in the audience with their wives that night and spent time being photographed sitting with the Maharishi. According to Mike, when they first met him, being only slightly familiar with meditation, they talked to the Maharishi about astrology. Mike went to London after the performance, and it was Dennis who got him on the phone and excitedly told him that he needed to return to Paris because the Maharishi was going to teach the Beach Boys to meditate. I've never been clear as to whether the Maharishi was meant to be some kind of a divine entity, or wise man or philosopher, or just a guy who taught meditation like you nowadays might find holding classes part-time at the Y. Apparently I'm not alone in this. From what I've read in 1968, even his longtime followers were split into factions over this very question. I think most people now agree that there are benefits to be derived from meditation, and at the very least, it was one of the more benign fads you could have gotten into in the late 60s. Anyway, this seems to be Dennis's song about meditation, though the lyrics are adapted from a poem, Be Still is a Thought to Live by Steve Kalinich, who says he had already devised his own stillness practice, similar to meditation, before he'd ever heard of Transcendental Meditation. Brian and Steve Kalinich recorded the full poem in August of 1969, with Kalinich reciting and Brian quietly playing the organ for the proposed album A World of Peace Must Come, which was finally released in 2008. The poem, as presented here, is much more complicated. Be Still only captures phrases from it. At the same time, there are many lines in Be Still that don't appear in Be Still is a Thought to Live by. I have no idea if the additional lines came from Dennis or from Kalinich or from somebody else. Abbreviating the lines and keeping the track short worked well for the Beach Boys album. At 1 minute and 25 seconds, it's the shortest track apart from Meant for You. If it had gone on much longer, it could have become ponderous and preachy. The arrangement couldn't be simpler, it's just Brian on organ, with a very tender solo vocal from Dennis. As it is, it comes across as sweet, humble, and heartfelt. Next up is Brian's Busy Doing Nothing, which was originally titled Even Steven. A version under that title was released on Wake the World in 2018. There are some very minor differences in the lyric. The main difference is the earlier version takes it at a slightly quicker tempo. The faster tempo works well until you come to the sections that begin, Take All the Time You Need, and I Wrote a Number Down on the released version. Those sections sound a little frantic at that pace, and might be the reason that Brian opted for a slower tempo. The lyrics are quirky in the very best sense of quirky Beach Boy lyrics, and famously include actual directions on how to get to Brian's home in Bel Air. We return to the Friends theme here, with Brian trying to get friends to come over, trying to reach them on the phone, which he fails to do, so he writes a letter instead. Famously, of course, this is a bossa nova. Al Jardine has acknowledged the influence of Brazilian music in general, and Antonio Carlos Jobim in particular, also the influence of Henry Mancini on the album, and I think it comes through most strongly here. Jobim's composition, The Girl from Ipanema, had been a #5 hit for Stan Getz and Astrid Gilberto in the summer of '64, and helped make Jobim fairly well known in the US. There's something in the bossa nova beat and the sound of the oboe and clarinets that make it feel like a hot, sticky day. On the other hand, the sound of the guitar and the vibes makes it sound believable that the air is cooling down. In any case, it's a beautiful melody and probably my favorite track on the album. Next up is Diamond Head, a late addition to the album. Brian is the only Beach Boy on the track, which was recorded at ID Sound on April 12, 1968, while the rest of the group was in Jacksonville, Florida, playing one of the shows that was not canceled or postponed on that spring tour. At 3 minutes 40 seconds, it's the longest track on the album, coming in 34 seconds longer than the second longest, Busy Doing Nothing. Everything else on the Friends album is well under the 3-minute mark. Incidentally, a lot of the commentary I've read remarks on how short the Friends album is, which is true by the standards of 1968 rock albums, but not so true by the standards of Beach Boy albums. At 25 minutes 32 seconds total, it's only a couple minutes longer than any one of the 4 sides of the Beatles' upcoming 1968 album. However, it's 1 minute and 34 seconds longer than Wild Honey, 22 seconds longer than All Summer Long, only 1 minute 10 seconds shorter than Summer Days and Summer Nights, and 2 minutes and 4 seconds shorter than Smiley Smile. Pet Sounds was a whopping 10 minutes 25 seconds longer, but that was a real anomaly in the Beach Boys catalog. Guitarist Al Vescovo reportedly came up with Diamond Head on the fly at the session. The AFM contract lists 4 musicians, and reportedly Brian insisted that all 4 be given a writing credit, those being Al Vescovo, Lyle Ritz, James Ackley, and Brian. Brian's contribution apparently was percussion. Jim Ackley was an engineer at ID Sound and made creative contributions, though the exact nature of his contribution is something of a mystery. Some sources say he may have provided some additional percussion. At least one source says he may have provided some additional guitar. If anybody knows any more about Jim Ackley and his contribution to this song, please let me know. The track really served as a showcase for 2 key session players to play instruments that they specialized in. Guitarist Al Vescovo and bassist Lyle Ritz had been Brian's go-to session men for the Friends album, having already appeared on 6 of the album's tracks, with Lyle Ritz also appearing as bassist on Transcendental Meditation before they recorded Diamond Head. Al Vescovo was a hot session guitarist. Increasingly, he'd concentrate more and more on steel guitar. Later on, among his many other credits, he worked with Lalo Schifrin on the soundtrack to Enter the Dragon in 1973, and contributed Life is Just a Bowl of Cherries to the film Pennies from Heaven in 1981. In the 2000s, he released a number of steel guitar albums under his own name, with titles like Man of Steel, Stealin' Some Jazz, Stealin' South of the Border, and Stealin' Some Big Band. He passed away in 2011. Lyle Ritz was a hot session bass player and was already known as the father of jazz ukulele, with albums like How About Uke in 1958 and 50th State Jazz, named in tribute to Hawaii's admission as the 50th state in 1959. Despite the popularity of the exotica genre in the late 50s, these albums are both squarely jazz albums, featuring mostly jazz standards with pretty standard jazz arrangements, apart from showcasing ukulele as the featured instrument. Lyle Ritz continued a long career as a session man and ukulele player, including appearing with the Beach Boys again on 15 Big Ones. He passed away in 2017. The track Diamond Head is almost like dueling steel guitar and uke, with 2 crack session players getting down to business on their favored instruments. Thunder and wave effects added later give it a Hawaiian exotica feel. The late addition of this track makes me wonder if a different track was scrapped to make room for it. The group worked on the album until the very day they left for the Southeastern tour, apparently trying to get it wound up. It would be reasonable to assume that they thought they had enough for a finished album. As we now know, there were several other tracks started around or during the sessions, like You're As Cool As You Can Be and Our New Home, but none of them appear to have been finished. Of course, it's possible they left expecting Brian to put together one more instrumental to finish the album. The track is very enjoyable, and with its ukulele a bit reminiscent of Little Pat from Smiley Smile. It's a bit of an outlier here, both with its exotica sound and its exotic locale theme on an album that is very inward-looking or even housebound. The last track on the album is appropriately titled Transcendental Meditation. And with a title like that in 1968, you'd expect it's going to feature sitar and tabla, or at least be very peaceful and soothing. Instead, you get the most cacophonous track on the album, and I would really love to know more about the evolution of this track. On the Wake the World set from 2018, there's an early backing track with the apparently provisional title of New Song. It's the song that became Transcendental Meditation, played in an arrangement that fits much better with the rest of the Friends album. Organ, piano, plucked guitar, bass, and percussion with some very nice backing vocals. That's followed by the backing track for Transcendental Meditation, which is overwhelmed by a big, in-your-face saxophone section and heavy drums. If there's anything else on the track, and I believe there is, the saxes and drums pretty well drown it out. Now, having heard that earlier arrangement, I really wish they'd stuck with that. Apart from Diamond Head, this was the last track recorded for the album, being finished on April 4th, just before the band headed out on the road for their tour of the Southeast. As discussed, the Friends album was released on June 24th, 1968. It hung around the 130 mark for most of the summer on the charts, peaking at 126 on August 17th, 1968. It did much better in the UK, reaching number 13. In order to get a perspective on that chart performance, let's take a look comparatively at the chart peaks of prior Beach Boy albums. So here is the chart peak for each of the original Beach Boy albums up to the time of Friends. You can see here starting with Surf and Safari, it goes to number 32. Not bad for a new band that was pretty much a regional success. And then you get beginning with Surfin' USA. They're reliably in the top 10, except for Shutdown Volume 2, which is released at the height of Beatlemania and only goes to number 13. Beach Boys Concert, of course, goes to number 1. Things are good. Pet Sounds looks a little disappointing by comparison to the others. It only reaches number 10. But then the big drop, of course, comes with Smiley Smile here, only going to number 41. Wild Honey kind of begins to recover, going to 24. So you can kind of imagine that at the time, I would think they would have been thinking, okay, well, Smiley Smile is really, that was the misstep. And, you know, we probably won't have a chart topper with our next album, but, you know, we might get up to 15, 12 if we're lucky, something like that. So let's zoom out and see how Friends really did to give an appreciation of this. So here in this box is the chart we were looking at before. And here is Friends at its peak of 126. And this is only about 5 months different from when Wild Honey peaked at number 24. This hit its peak, Wild Honey hit its peak on March 9th of 68. August 17th of 68, Friends peaks at 126. So you can see this is kind of a unrivaled disaster in the Beach Boys' recording career up to this point, and I'm sure it really scared the hell out of everybody. Kind of understandably, the reaction seems to have been one of damage control and trying to put Friends quickly behind them. The Do It Again single was out 2 weeks later, and 6 weeks later, Best of the Beach Boys Volume 3 was released on August 5th. The album peaked at 153 on October 5th, but Do It Again gave them a much-needed hit single. And I'm sure this is why Do It Again in Beach Boy bios is always touted as the song that brought them back, even though it only reached number 20, whereas Darlin' had reached number 19 earlier in the year when expectations were still high. Coming on the heels of the disaster of Friends, Do It Again offered a ray of hope that there was still a record-buying audience for the group. Importantly, Do It Again did even better in the UK, going all the way to number 1 late in the summer. I've read some Beach Boy histories that chalk up the commercial failure of the Friends album to the peaceful, tranquil music being out of step with the national mood. I'm sure there's some truth to that, although it isn't hard to find samples of peaceful, tranquil records that were successful during the same period. I think a larger problem may have been that people weren't so much rejecting the new music as simply not paying attention anymore. By 1968, for a lot of the public, the fast-moving world of 60s pop had passed the Beach Boys by, and this would be a perception that would be much more difficult to overcome than simply an album that the public didn't relate to. Music was changing fast, and the Beach Boys were hardly the only rock act that had been hot in '66 and seemed cold in '68. With a lot of these, their labels had issued greatest hits packages sometime between '66 and early '68, just as Capitol had done with Best of the Beach Boys. And in each case, it seemed kind of like tacit acknowledgement that the record label thought these acts had largely run their course. Some samples that come to mind include the Dave Clark Five, Herman's Hermits, the Kinks, the Hollies, the Byrds, the Lovin' Spoonful, and the Mamas and the Papas. Like the Beach Boys, some of them would continue making good records. A few would make comebacks, but in '68, all of them, for various reasons, were struggling after hot runs on the charts just a year or two earlier. Additionally, Eric Burdon and the Animals had the last in their string of hits in mid-'68. The Monkees were hot in late '66 and cold by late '68. And until they came roaring back in August with the Hey Jude Revolution single, some people probably suspected that the Beatles were going cold in '68 too. Of course, today the Friends album is generally beloved by Beach Boy fans, though it often seems overlooked when discussing the group's work. I think one of the pitfalls of creating a work that seems so light and effortless is that it can give the impression of being lightweight and requiring little effort. There are moments of real beauty and unique, genuine expression here. Yes, it's lightweight and easily missed, but so is a fresh, warm breeze off the ocean. And it would be a shame once in a while not to take in a fresh, warm breeze. It's the same with the Beach Boys' Friends album. It doesn't shout out for your attention. It's simple, light, and easy, but it would be a shame once in a while not to take some time to really appreciate those aspects of the Beach Boys' music which are shown to such nice effect on the Friends album. Hope you've enjoyed this. I look forward to your comments, thoughts, and insights. Please hit like and subscribe if you don't mind. I always appreciate that. And we will see you next time when we will continue our discussion of the year 1968. Have a good week. Bye.